Kireth pressed herself against the cold metal wall of the maintenance corridor, her entire body shaking. The hunger had become something alive inside her, gnawing at her insides with teeth made of fire. Above her head, through the metal grating that separated the lower levels from the commercial decks, she could see them. Dozens of aliens from across the galaxy, their bellies full, their voices loud with laughter as they conducted their business and enjoyed their meals. She watched them through eyes that had grown dim with starvation. Once, her people had been beautiful. The Valkyrie were known throughout the sector for the bioluminescent patterns that danced across their pale blue skin, glowing softly in the darkness like living artwork. But those patterns had faded now, reduced to barely visible traces. Her body was saving every bit of energy it could, shutting down everything that wasn't absolutely necessary for survival. 8 days. It had been 8 days since her last real meal. She'd read about this in school back when her world still had schools, still had hope. The Valkyrie body could survive approximately 10 days without food before the cascade began. Organ failure. One system after another shutting down until there was nothing left. She had maybe 2 days remaining. Perhaps 3 if she was unlucky enough to suffer longer. The memories of how she'd ended up here played through her mind like a cruel recording she couldn't stop. She'd arrived on Station Zenith 7 with such hope burning in her chest. The refugee work program had seemed like a miracle after her homeworld's ecological collapse. Billions of her people had died when the crops failed, when the water turned toxic, when the air itself became poison. She'd been one of the lucky few who'd managed to get off-world, accepted into a program that promised work, promised a future, promised a chance to earn enough to bring her younger brother to safety. They'd assigned her to a cargo processing facility. The work was hard, the hours long, but she hadn't complained. She'd been grateful. Eager to prove herself. Determined to show the galaxy that the Valkyrie were worth saving. Then came the accident. A loader malfunction, they'd said. The investigation had cleared her of any wrongdoing, but it didn't matter. The equipment she'd been operating had crashed into a shipment of luxury goods belonging to some wealthy Draxian merchants. Tens of thousands of credits in damage. Her supervisor, a massive reptilian creature with scales like armor and eyes like frozen amber, had terminated her contract on the spot. No appeal. No second chance. No mercy. Security had escorted her out with nothing but the thin work clothes she'd been wearing. That was 8 days ago. She'd tried everything. The Station 8 offices had seemed like her only hope, but they'd turned her away at every turn. Improper documentation, they'd said, their voices flat and bureaucratic. Her work visa had been terminated, but her transit papers weren't sufficient for assistance. She needed to file one form to get another form to apply for a third form, and each form required something she didn't have. It was a maze designed to have no exit, a trap built from paperwork and indifference. So she'd begged. The shame of it still burned in what was left of her pride, but hunger cared nothing for dignity. She'd approached aliens of a dozen different species, her voice breaking as she asked for help, for food, for anything. Most had simply walked past as if she didn't exist. Their translation devices made her words perfectly clear, but somehow they still couldn't hear her. Some had been worse than indifferent. This morning, a group of Draxian merchants had gathered around her usual spot near the waste recycling port. She'd recognized them. They were associates of the merchants whose goods she'd accidentally destroyed. Their scales had gleamed with expensive oils, their multiple arms heavy with purchased luxuries. "Look, brothers," one had announced, his voice deliberately loud. "The contaminated one still breathes." The others had laughed, a harsh clicking sound that echoed off the metal walls. "How long before station services remove the carcass?" another had asked, as if she wasn't there, wasn't listening, wasn't a person at all. "Valkyrie physiology is fascinating," a third had said in a tone of clinical interest. "They shut down after 9 or 10 days without sustenance. I'd estimate she has perhaps 2 more days. 3 at most." They'd tossed their garbage near her feet, spoiled food that even the recycling systems had rejected, and walked away still laughing. She hadn't touched it. Some part of her, some small stubborn piece that still remembered who she'd been, refused to sink that low. Now, as the station's lighting systems dimmed to simulate the night cycle, she felt her consciousness beginning to waver. The edges of her vision were going dark. Her thoughts were becoming slow and thick, like moving through deep water. She wondered if this was how it would end. Alone in a maintenance corridor, forgotten, just another casualty of a galaxy that had plenty but chose to share with so few. A shadow fell across her face. She looked up slowly, the movement requiring enormous effort. A human stood above her, on the other side of the grating. Humans were relatively new to the galactic community. Most species considered them unremarkable. Average strength, average intelligence. Nothing particularly special about them except perhaps their tendency toward emotional responses that other species found excessive. The human stopped walking. He was looking down at her through the grating, and even through her fading vision, she could see his expression change. He stood there for a long moment, just looking, and she waited for him to walk away like all the others. Instead, he moved to the access panel. The sound of it opening made her flinch. Footsteps on the metal ladder. He was coming down. Kirith tried to press herself further against the wall, but she had no energy left to move. She watched as the human descended and approached her slowly, carefully, the way someone might approach a frightened animal that could bolt at any moment. "Hey there," he said, and his voice was gentle in a way she'd almost forgotten voices could be. "My name's Marcus Webb." He crouched down a few feet away from her, keeping his distance, not crowding her space. The translator implant rendered his words in standard galactic common, but there was something in his tone that transcended translation. "When's the last time you ate?" he asked. The question was so direct, so simple that it took her by surprise. "Why do you care?" The words came out as barely more than a rasp, her throat dry and damaged. "Because you're hungry and I've got food." He said it as if it was the most obvious thing in the universe, as if the answer required no more explanation than that. He extended his hand toward her, palm up, an offer rather than a demand. "Come eat with me." Kirith stared at the offered hand. Her mind, slow with starvation, tried to process what was happening. She searched his face for signs of the cruelty she'd learned to expect. The mockery. The trap. The joke that would make her humiliation complete. But his eyes held only concern, genuine and unguarded. "What do you want from me?" she whispered. Marcus looked genuinely confused by the question, as if she'd asked him something that made no sense. "Nothing. I just can't watch someone starve. It's not right." He kept his hand extended, steady and patient. "There's a cantina 2 decks up. Human-run place. They'll have something compatible with your biology." I checked. "You checked?" Something in her chest tightened at those 2 words. "Yeah, I looked up Velcari nutritional requirements in the station database. Wasn't hard." His hand remained extended, waiting. "Come on. No strings attached. No payment expected. Just food. Just help." For the first time in 8 days, Kiretha's bioluminescent markings flickered with something other than the dull pulse of impending shutdown. It was faint, barely visible, but it was there. Hope, her body recognized, even if her mind was almost too tired to believe it. With trembling hands that felt like they belonged to someone else, she reached out and took the human's hand. His grip was warm and steady, solid and real. He helped her to her feet with surprising gentleness, supporting her weight as her legs threatened to buckle. The cantina's door slid open with a soft hiss, and Kirith felt warmth wash over her face for the first time in days. The place was called The Comet's Tail, and though it was modest compared to the gleaming restaurants on the upper decks, to her it looked like paradise. Warm lighting filled the space with a golden glow. The smell of cooking food from a dozen different worlds made her empty stomach twist with desperate need. The sound of casual conversation and clinking dishes created an atmosphere of comfort she'd almost forgotten existed. Marcus guided her inside with a gentle hand on her elbow, supporting her when her legs threatened to give out. Heads turned as they entered. She saw the stares, heard the whispers. A Zenthari couple at a nearby table leaned together, their mandibles clicking rapidly in what was clearly gossip. A Draxian pair at a corner booth looked at her and then at each other, their scaled faces twisting with obvious disgust. Marcus ignored them all. He led Kirith to a booth near the back of the cantina, away from most of the other patrons. The seat was soft and she sank into it with a small gasp of relief. She couldn't remember the last time she'd sat on something that wasn't cold metal or hard plastic. "Thomas?" Marcus called out toward the counter, his voice friendly and familiar. A human male looked up from where he was preparing food. He was stocky and solid-looking, with graying hair and a face that seemed built for smiling. "Got a hungry friend here. Need a Velcari-compatible meal. Something nutrient-dense, easy on the system." Thomas looked at Kirith for just a moment, and she braced herself for judgment or pity or disgust. Instead, he simply nodded with the same casual acceptance he might have shown any customer. "I've got just the thing. Give me 20 minutes. Marcus slid into the booth across from her. "Water okay for now?" Kirith managed a small nod. Her throat was so dry it hurt to swallow. Marcus signaled to a serving unit, and within moments 2 glasses of clear, clean water appeared on their table. She picked up the glass with both hands to keep them from shaking and brought it to her lips. The water was cool and perfect, and every cell in her body screamed at her to gulp it down, to drink until the glass was empty and then ask for more. But she forced herself to take small, careful sips. Her stomach had been empty too long. Too much too fast would make her sick. Marcus watched her with patient concern, not saying anything, just letting her drink. When she'd finished half the glass and set it down with trembling hands, he spoke softly. "So," he said, his voice gentle and non-demanding. "How'd you end up down there? In the maintenance corridor?" Something about his tone, about the genuine interest in his eyes, broke down the walls she'd built around her story. The words started flowing out of her like water from a broken dam. She told him everything. About her world and how it had died slowly, the crops failing first, then the water systems, then the air itself turning against them. About the billions who had died and the handful who'd managed to escape. About the refugee program that had seemed like such a blessing, such an impossible stroke of luck. She told him about the cargo facility, about working herself to exhaustion every day and being grateful for it. About the loader malfunction that hadn't been her fault but had destroyed that shipment of expensive goods anyway. About her supervisor's cold eyes and colder words as security escorted her out. About the 8 offices and their endless forms and impossible requirements. About 8 days of slowly starving while surrounded by abundance. With each detail, Marcus's expression grew harder, his jaw tighter. When she finished, he leaned back and shook his head slowly. "That's designed to fail," he said, and there was anger in his voice, but none of it directed at her. "The whole system. It's built to keep people trapped. You know that, right? None of this is your fault." Before she could respond, Thomas appeared at their table carrying a large bowl. Steam rose from it and the smell hit her like a physical force. "Velcari grain porridge," he announced, setting it carefully in front of her. "Got the recipe from the database. Added some synthesized nutrients that your people need. Should be gentle on your system after not eating for a while." Kira stared at the bowl. The porridge was a pale golden color, thick and substantial. It smelled like home, like meals her mother used to make before the world ended. She looked up at Thomas, then at Marcus, searching for the catch, the price, the hidden cost. "Go on," Marcus said quietly. "It's real. It's yours." She picked up the spoon with shaking hands and took her first bite. The flavor was simple and pure and perfect. Her body recognized it immediately, flooding her system with relief and gratitude and desperate need for more. She forced herself to eat slowly, taking small bites, knowing her shrunken stomach couldn't handle too much at once. Marcus and Thomas talked casually about shipping schedules and station politics, giving her space to eat without pressure. Their easy conversation flowed around her like a protective barrier. Halfway through the bowl, she felt something she hadn't felt in over a week. Her bioluminescent markings flickered, then began to glow with a soft, steady light. Marcus noticed and his whole face lit up with a smile. "That's better. You're looking more alive already." Kireth set down her spoon, needing to ask the question that had been burning in her mind since he'd climbed down into that corridor. "Why are you doing this? Humans are still new to the galactic community. You're still establishing your reputation, your place among the other species. Associating with someone like me, someone who's been marked as a failure, could damage that. It could hurt you." Marcus's expression turned serious. He leaned forward, his eyes locked on hers. "You want to know something about humans? We've been where you are. Maybe not starving on a space station, but we've been the ones people laughed at. The ones who didn't matter. The ones left behind by systems that didn't care if we lived or died." He paused. "When we finally made it to the stars, when we finally got accepted into this galactic community, we promised ourselves something. We'd remember. We'd remember what it felt like to be powerless, and we wouldn't let that memory make us cruel. Most species forget that lesson," Kireth said softly. "They gain power and forget what it was like to have none." "Yeah, well, most species aren't human." The cantina door opened again. Kireth glanced up automatically and felt her blood freeze. 3 Draxian merchants walked in, their scales gleaming under the lights. She recognized them immediately. They were the same ones who had mocked her that morning, who had thrown garbage at her feet and discussed her death as if it were entertainment. Their cold amber eyes swept the cantina and locked onto her. Recognition flashed across their faces, followed by cruel amusement. "Well, well," the leader said, his voice loud enough to carry across the entire space. Several other patrons looked up with interest. The contaminated one found a fool willing to waste food on her. How touching. Marcus's jaw tightened, but his voice remained calm and level. "You gentlemen need something, or are you just here to be unpleasant?" "Merely observing, human." The Draxian's smile showed rows of sharp teeth. Though I feel obligated to offer you advice. The Valkyrie are a failed species. Their world is dead, their people are dying. Helping them only prolongs their inevitable extinction. It's a waste of resources. A waste of effort. A waste of your time. Funny, Marcus said, and though his tone was light, his eyes had gone cold and hard. I was thinking the same thing about bullies. They always seem so confident, so powerful, right up until the moment someone actually stands up to them. Then they're not so impressive anymore. The Draxian scales rippled, a sign of anger in his species. Careful, human. You're very new here. Your species is very small, very unimportant in the grand scheme of galactic affairs. You are, shall we say, very expendable. Thomas stepped out from behind the counter. In his hand, he held a plasma wrench, the kind used for emergency repairs on station systems. He wasn't holding it in a threatening way, but the message was clear. I think you didn't hear my friend clearly, he said, his voice friendly but firm. So let me make it simpler. Get out of my cantina. The three Draxians looked between Marcus and Thomas, clearly reassessing the situation. Whatever they'd expected, unified resistance from multiple humans hadn't been it. With final sneers that attempted to save face, they turned and walked out. The moment the door closed behind them, Kirith realized she'd been holding her breath. She exhaled shakily, her hands trembling around her spoon. Sorry about that, Marcus said casually, as if he'd just dealt with a minor inconvenience rather than a potential confrontation with beings twice his size. Some species never learned basic manners. He gestured at her bowl. You should finish that. We'll figure out the rest afterward. For the first time in 8 days, Kirith felt something bloom in her chest that she'd thought was dead forever. Oh, retrike. The message arrived on Marcus's data pad early the next morning, official and cold. Report immediately to Station Administrator's office regarding violation of station vagrancy protocols and interference with lawful commerce. He read it twice, set down his morning coffee and sighed. He'd expected this. When you publicly embarrassed powerful merchants, they didn't just let it go. They filed complaints. They made calls. They made sure there were consequences. He was still reading the message when he heard footsteps outside his docking bay. Kirith stood there, her bioluminescent markings pulsing with anxiety. She'd spent the night in the small crew quarters on his ship, the first real bed she'd slept in since her termination. She looked better than yesterday, her markings brighter, her movements less shaky, but fear was written clearly across her face. Marcus, I heard about the summons, she said quickly, the words tumbling out. This is my fault. I shouldn't have let you help me. I should have known they'd retaliate. You need to distance yourself from me before this gets worse. Tell them I forced you somehow, tell them anything you need to. Stop, Marcus interrupted, his voice gentle but firm. He stood and faced her directly. You didn't do anything wrong. Neither did I. We're going to go talk to this administrator together, and we're going to handle whatever comes. They walked through the station together and Marcus noticed how people stared. Word traveled fast on Zenith 7. By now, everyone knew about the human who'd stood up to the Draxian merchants. Some of the stares were curious. Some were disapproving. A few were sympathetic. Marcus ignored them all. The administrative sector was on the upper levels, where everything was clean and polished and designed to intimidate. Station Administrator Quellix's office was exactly what Marcus expected. Every surface was organized with obsessive precision. Files were arranged by size and color. Equipment was positioned at exact angles. Even the lighting seemed calculated to create an atmosphere of absolute control. Quellix himself was a Zenthari, tall and mantis-like, with compound eyes that reflected light in unsettling ways. His species was known for rigid adherence to rules and protocols. He stood behind his desk, his posture radiating authority and disapproval. Mr. Webb, Quellix began without any greeting or preamble, his voice cold and clipped. You have been accused of harboring a station vagrant in direct violation of Protocol 7-4. Additionally, 3 respected merchants have filed formal harassment complaints regarding your behavior yesterday evening. Marcus felt his jaw tighten. Respected, he repeated, letting the word hang in the air. Is that what we're calling people who throw garbage at starving refugees now? Is that the kind of behavior that earns respect on this station? Your personal feelings regarding the Draxian merchants are entirely irrelevant to this matter, Quellix replied, his mandibles clicking with irritation. They are licensed vendors in good standing. They contribute significantly to station commerce. The Valkyrie, on the other hand, is not in good standing. She has no valid work authorization, no approved residence status, and no legal standing to be on this station. She's a person who was hungry, Marcus said, his voice rising slightly despite his efforts to stay calm. I bought her a meal. Since when is feeding someone a crime? It becomes problematic when it creates disturbances that interfere with normal station operations. When it causes conflicts with established vendors. When it sets precedents that could encourage other vagrants to remain on station rather than seeking relocation. Quellix's compound eyes fixed on Marcus with insect-like intensity. I am hereby issuing you a formal warning. Any further incidents of this nature will result in immediate revocation of your docking privileges. As for the vagrant. Her name is Kirath, Marcus said sharply. Quellix continued as if he hadn't spoken. She will be processed for removal on the next available transport bound for Valkyrie space. This is scheduled to depart in approximately 48 hours. That's a death sentence, Kirath said quietly from beside Marcus. Her voice was barely above a whisper, but it cut through the room. There's nothing left in Valkyrie space. No food distribution systems. No functioning infrastructure. No government to provide aid. Sending me back there is the same as killing me, just with more steps in between. That is not the station's concern, Quellix replied, his tone suggesting the matter was already decided. You should have maintained proper documentation. You should have secured alternative employment before your contract termination. These are personal failures, not station responsibilities. Marcus felt anger rising in his chest, hot and fierce. Let me make sure I understand this correctly. She loses her job through absolutely no fault of her own. An equipment malfunction that even your own investigation cleared her of causing. Then she can't get aid because your bureaucratic system is designed like a maze with no exit. And now you're going to send her back to a dead world to die slowly. And somehow I'm the one getting official warnings for feeding her a bowl of porridge. Station protocol is entirely clear on these matters. Station protocol is designed to protect profits, not people, Marcus cut in, leaning forward over the desk. Where I come from, Administrator, we don't let people starve to death while we file paperwork. We don't laugh at suffering. We don't stand by and watch someone die because helping them might be inconvenient or might upset some wealthy merchants. And we sure as hell don't send refugees back to their deaths just because it's easier than doing the right thing. Quellix rose to his full height, towering over both of them. His mandibles spread wide in what Marcus recognized as an aggressive display. Your species' emotional outbursts are noted, Mr. Webb. However, they do not supersede station regulations. This matter is now closed. You are both dismissed. The vagrant will report to processing in 12 hours. I'm not leaving her, Marcus said flatly. Then you will both be removed from this station. The choice is yours to make. The threat hung in the air between them. Marcus's entire livelihood depended on having access to Zenith 7. His freight business, his contracts, his reputation, everything he'd worked for over the past 3 years. Losing his docking privileges would mean starting over from nothing somewhere else, assuming he could even find another station willing to take him. Kirath grabbed his arm, her fingers digging in with desperate strength. Marcus, don't. Please. You've already done more than anyone had any right to expect. I won't let you sacrifice everything you've built for someone you just met. I won't let you destroy your life for mine. Marcus looked at her, then back at Quellix. He thought about walking away. About apologizing. About saving his business and his future. It would be so easy. So reasonable. So practical. He stood his ground. I'm not apologizing. I'm not backing down. And I'm not letting you ship her off to die. Quellix's eyes gleamed with what might have been satisfaction. He'd won. He'd forced the human into an impossible choice, and now he could remove both problems at once. Then, effective immediately, your docking privileges are suspended pending formal review and... Hold that thought, Administrator. The new voice came from the doorway, confident and commanding. Marcus turned to see Helen Porter striding into the office. She was the human trade representative assigned to Zenith 7, a woman in her 60s with steel-gray hair and the bearing of someone who'd spent decades navigating complicated bureaucracies. Behind her came 3 more humans. Thomas from the cantina, and 2 other freight contractors Marcus knew, Robert and James. Miss Porter, Quellix said, his mandibles clicking rapidly with clear annoyance. This is a closed administrative matter that does not require diplomatic involvement. Actually, Administrator, I'm afraid it does, Helen replied smoothly, moving to stand beside Marcus. I've just received multiple reports that a human citizen is being threatened with expulsion and loss of livelihood for providing humanitarian aid to a refugee. The Human Coalition takes a very dim view of such actions. In fact, I believe this now constitutes a potential diplomatic incident that will require thorough investigation. If Marcus's docking rights get pulled, then mine get pulled too, Robert said gruffly, crossing his arms. Solidarity. That's how humans work. Same here, James added, stepping forward. You want to punish compassion? You want to make helping people a crime? Then you'll have to punish all of us because we're all in this together. Quellix's mandibles clicked rapidly, a sign of severe agitation in his species. This is highly irregular. You cannot simply. So is letting people starve to death, Helen cut in, her voice still pleasant but with steel underneath. So is creating bureaucratic systems specifically designed to trap refugees. So is sending people back to dead worlds because it's convenient for your commercial vendors. She smiled, but there was no warmth in it. Now, I strongly suggest we discuss a more reasonable solution to this situation. One that doesn't involve expelling my citizens or sending refugees to certain death. Unless, of course, you'd prefer that I file formal complaints with the Galactic Council about the humanitarian conditions on this station? I'm sure they'd be very interested in how Zenith 7 handles vulnerable populations. For a long moment, Quellix stood completely still. Marcus could practically see the calculations happening behind those compound eyes. The political ramifications. The potential investigations. The scrutiny that would come down on the station and on him personally. Finally, his mandibles clicked once, a gesture that might have been resignation. I will review the matter more thoroughly. No immediate action will be taken against anyone at this time. Excellent decision, Administrator, Helen said brightly. I'm sure we can find an arrangement that satisfies all parties. Come on, all of you. Let's let Administrator Quellix work in peace. As they filed out of the office, Marcus turned to the others, feeling something tight in his chest loosen slightly. Thanks. You didn't have to do that. Any of you. Yeah, we did, Thomas replied simply. It's what we do. It's what humans do. Helen put a hand on Kiratha's shoulder, her expression warm. Welcome to how humans handle things, dear. We're stubborn, we're loud, and we don't leave our own behind. She paused, looking the young Valkyrie directly in the eyes. And you're one of ours now, whether Administrator Quellix likes it or not. Kiratha's bioluminescent markings blazed brilliant blue, brighter than Marcus had seen them yet, lighting up the corridor around them like a small constellation of stars. Retrike. News traveled through Zenith 7 like electricity through wire. Within a single day, everyone on the station knew about the human who'd stood up to Administrator Quellix. By the second day, everyone knew about the Valkyrie refugee who'd been saved from starvation. By the third day, something remarkable started happening. Other refugees began appearing at the comet's tail. First came a Tillari female, her pale skin covered with radiation scars from a civil war that had torn her world apart. She stood in the doorway of the cantina, trembling, barely able to form words. Thomas took one look at her and called out, "Sit down, honey. Let's get some food in you." Then came a young Karath male, barely more than a child by his species standards. His family had been killed in a plague outbreak. He'd spent his last credits getting to Zenith 7, hoping for work, finding only rejection. Marcus found him sleeping in a cargo bay and brought him straight to the cantina. 3 Bendari siblings arrived together, holding on to each other like they were afraid of being separated. They'd fled political persecution on their homeworld. The oldest couldn't have been more than 20 standard years. They were scared, hungry, and completely lost. The humans fed them all. Thomas expanded his kitchen, pushing tables together to make room for more people. Helen worked her contacts in the station bureaucracy, finding loopholes and obscure regulations that could provide temporary protection. Robert and James started offering odd jobs on their freight ships, nothing permanent but enough to put credits in desperate hands. Marcus found himself accidentally becoming a coordinator, matching refugees with resources, needs with solutions. But not everyone was pleased with these developments. The wealthy merchants, led by the Draxian named Graxus, escalated their complaints. They filed formal petitions. They called in favors. They applied pressure from every direction they could find. The station's upper commercial sectors, they argued, were being overrun with undesirables. Property values would decline. Legitimate business would suffer. Something had to be done. Administrator Quellix, receiving pressure from the station's corporate owners and the merchant guilds, finally made a decision. He called for a public hearing, a formal assembly to address what he termed the human problem and its impact on station operations. The hearing chamber was packed. On one side sat the merchants, station officials, and wealthy aliens who valued order and profit above all else. On the other side, a smaller but determined group gathered, the humans and the refugees they'd been helping. The tension in the room was thick enough to cut. Graxus spoke first. He was an imposing figure, his scaled body gleaming under the chamber lights, his multiple arms gesturing with practiced authority. His voice carried the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his entire life. Esteemed administrator, fellow merchants, honored delegates, he began smoothly. I speak today for many when I say that this station's quality and reputation have deteriorated rapidly over recent weeks. Vagrants now loiter openly in our commercial areas. Station resources are being diverted to individuals who have done nothing to earn them. Our security personnel are stretched thin dealing with individuals who have no legal right to be here. And all of this chaos, all of this disruption, is due directly to human interference with proper station operations. He turned and pointed directly at Marcus, his gesture dramatic and accusatory. Mr. Webb and his associates have created an environment where failure is actively rewarded, where those who cannot maintain themselves expect to be sustained indefinitely by others. This is unsustainable. This is unacceptable. This threatens the very foundation of how civilized commerce operates. I hereby formally request that Mr. Webb, along with all those he has inappropriately aided, be permanently expelled from Zenith 7. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the merchant section. Several well-dressed aliens nodded approvingly. Quelix, sitting at the elevated administrator's bench, nodded slowly. Mr. Webb, you are permitted to respond to these charges. Marcus stood and the room fell quiet. He looked tired. The past few weeks had been exhausting, full of late nights and early mornings, of coordinating aid and fighting bureaucracy. But his eyes were clear and determined. You want to know what makes humans different? He began, his voice quiet but carrying clearly through the chamber. It's not our technology. We didn't invent faster-than-light travel. It's not our strength. There are a dozen species stronger than us. It's not our intelligence. We're pretty average at most things by galactic standards. He walked slowly toward the center of the chamber, and people leaned forward to hear him better. But here's what we do have. We remember. We remember what it's like to struggle. When we first made contact with your galactic civilization, you know what we were told? That we were probationary. That we had to prove ourselves worthy of joining. That we were too emotional, too unpredictable, too dangerously volatile to be trusted with the responsibilities of galactic citizenship. His voice grew stronger, more passionate. We almost didn't make it. The vote to accept humanity into the galactic community came down to a single delegate. One vote. One person who decided that maybe, just maybe, we deserved a chance. That delegate was a Karath named David. Yes, he took a human name after spending time on Earth, and he said something I will never forget as long as I live. He said, "How can we call ourselves civilized if we only welcome those who've never known hardship?" Marcus pointed at Kiraeth, who sat in the front row, her markings glowing softly. When I saw her starving in those maintenance corridors, I didn't see a vagrant or a failure or a drain on resources. I saw someone in the exact same position humans were in 20 years ago. Desperate, alone, being judged by people who'd never missed a meal in their lives, never wondered if they'd see tomorrow, never felt what it's like to be powerless. He turned to face Graxus directly. You stand there and say that failure shouldn't be rewarded. I say that being the victim of an equipment accident isn't failure. Falling through bureaucratic cracks that were designed to trap people isn't failure. Losing everything through absolutely no fault of your own isn't failure. You know what is failure? Having the power to help someone and choosing cruelty instead. Having abundance and watching others starve. That's failure. That's what should be punished. Robert stood up from his seat. My grandfather was a refugee, he said, his voice gruff with emotion. Political asylum. His whole family was killed in a war. If humans on Earth hadn't helped him, hadn't given him a place to stay and food to eat and a chance to rebuild, I wouldn't exist today. That's why I help now. Because someone helped him. James rose next. My parents fled drought and famine when their region's climate collapsed. They arrived with nothing. Absolutely nothing. Someone gave them a chance. How can I possibly do less for others? One by one, humans throughout the chamber stood up. Each one shared a story. Ancestors who'd fled persecution. Families who'd survived disasters. People who'd been given second chances by compassionate strangers. The stories poured out, a flood of memory and gratitude and determination. Then something unexpected happened. Something nobody had anticipated. A Zenthari clerk, one of Quelix's own administrative staff, stood up shakily from the officials section. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I must confess something. I have been turning away refugees who came to the aid office seeking help. Not because they lacked proper documentation, but because I was instructed to make the process as difficult as possible. To discourage applications. To maintain what we called station aesthetics. Quellix's mandibles clicked sharply. That is absolutely not. It's true, another official interrupted, standing as well. I was given the same instructions. We were told to prioritize the comfort and convenience of paying customers over the welfare of vulnerable individuals. To make sure that poverty remained invisible. More voices joined in. Station personnel, lower-level merchants, even some security officers. They spoke of orders to ignore suffering, to look the other way, to prioritize profits over people. The chamber erupted into chaos, with dozens of conversations happening simultaneously. A figure in the back of the chamber stood, and something about her presence commanded immediate silence. She was a Valdran named Elizabeth, a Galactic Council observer who'd been sitting quietly throughout the proceedings. Her species was known for their careful neutrality and dedication to proper procedure. I have heard enough, she announced, her voice cutting through the noise like a blade. Administrator Quellix, it has become abundantly clear that this station has been operating in systematic violation of multiple Galactic Council humanitarian protocols. I am hereby placing Station Zenith 7 under formal review. Until my investigation is complete and a full report is filed, no actions of any kind will be taken against Mr. Webb, his associates, or any of the refugees they have assisted. Quellix seemed to physically deflate. Graxus's scales rippled with barely contained fury. Elizabeth turned to Marcus, and something that might have been respect showed in her expression. Mr. Webb, the Council will be developing new guidelines for refugee support across all member stations. I believe your mutual aid network could serve as a useful model for those guidelines. The galaxy, it seems, needs to remember some lessons it has forgotten. Kiraetha's markings blazed with emotion as Marcus sat back down beside her, and for the first time since arriving on Zenith 7, she truly believed that everything might actually be okay. Retrike. 3 months had passed since the hearing, and Station Zenith 7 looked like a completely different place. The changes had been gradual at first, then suddenly overwhelming, like water that starts as a trickle and becomes a flood. What had started as Marcus buying one meal for one starving refugee had grown into something nobody could have predicted. The informal network of humans helping aliens in need was now officially recognized as the Zenith Relief Initiative. It had its own office space, donated by a merchant who'd been moved by the stories shared at the hearing. It had volunteer staff, both human and alien. It had funding from unexpected sources. It had become, against all odds, a permanent part of station life. The initiative offered job training programs that taught refugees skills they could use. It provided temporary housing in converted cargo spaces that had been cleaned and made livable. It offered legal assistance to help people navigate the bureaucratic maze that had trapped so many. It gave integration support to help newcomers understand station culture and customs. What had begun with simple kindness had become systematic, organized, efficient. Kiraeth stood at the front desk of the initiative's main office, reviewing intake forms with a young Tilari refugee who'd arrived on the station just that morning. The girl was terrified, her large eyes darting around nervously, her hands shaking so badly she could barely hold the data pad. She reminded Kiraeth painfully of herself just a few months ago. "You're safe now," Kiraeth said gently, her bioluminescent markings glowing with warm, reassuring light. "We're going to help you. We'll get you fed first because I know you're hungry. Then we'll find you a place to stay tonight, somewhere clean and secure. Tomorrow we'll start working on finding you employment that matches your skills. No judgment. No impossible requirements that nobody could ever meet. Just help. Just support." The Tilari girl looked up at her with tears streaming down her face. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you help someone like me? I have nothing to offer. Nothing to trade. I'm nobody important." Kiraeth smiled, and in her mind she saw a dark maintenance corridor, a human face looking down at her through a grating, a hand reaching out in the darkness. "Because someone helped me when I needed it most," she said softly. "Because kindness shouldn't be rare or special. It should be normal. And because you deserve a chance to survive, to rebuild, to have a future. Everyone deserves that." Marcus watched from the doorway, leaning against the frame with his arms crossed, feeling a quiet pride that he couldn't quite put into words. Kiraeth had transformed so completely from the dying refugee he'd found in that corridor. She'd become a fierce advocate, someone who understood exactly what these newcomers were going through because she'd been there herself. She was better at this work than he was, honestly. She had a way of connecting with people that came from shared experience and genuine empathy. Helen Porter appeared beside him, following his gaze to where Kireth was now pulling up housing options on her data pad, explaining each one to the frightened Tilari girl. "She's amazing," Helen said quietly. "She really is," Marcus agreed. Helen turned to look at him, a slight smile on her face. "So are you, most stubborn human I've ever met, and that's really saying something given how stubborn we are as a species." Marcus shook his head. "I just bought someone dinner one time. You all did the rest. You worked the bureaucracy, Thomas expanded his kitchen, Robert and James created jobs, you got the council involved. I just started it." "One act of decency sparked all of this," Helen said, gesturing at the busy office around them. "That's the thing about humans, Marcus. We don't need grand gestures or perfect heroes. We just need someone willing to do the right thing even when it's hard. Even when it costs something." A movement at the entrance caught their attention. A Draxian female entered hesitantly, looking uncomfortable and out of place. Marcus recognized her immediately. She'd been part of Graxus's merchant group, one of the ones who'd filed complaints against him. His first instinct was defensive, but he pushed it down and walked over to her. "Can we help you?" he asked, keeping his voice neutral. The Draxian scales shifted colors with what Marcus had learned to recognize as embarrassment. My nephew. He's fallen on difficult times. Medical debt. He lost his position because of it. I was told that humans help people here. Without judgment. Without requiring payment." She paused, clearly struggling with the words. "Is that true?" Marcus felt a smile spreading across his face. 3 months ago, this same person had been calling for his expulsion. Now she was here asking for help. "Yeah, that's true. Come on, let's get him registered in our system. We'll see what we can do." Throughout the day, more unusual visitors appeared. A wealthy Zenthari businessman inquired about making a substantial donation to the initiative's housing fund. 2 Karath laborers asked about volunteering their free time to help with job training. A security officer who'd been part of the group that used to chase refugees away from commercial areas came in, looking sheepish, asking how he could assist with outreach to newly arrived aliens who might need help. The galaxy was learning. Slowly, imperfectly, but learning nonetheless. That evening, the original group gathered at the Comet's Tail for their weekly dinner. It had become a tradition, a way to stay connected and share updates on the work. Thomas always closed the cantina early on these nights, and they'd push several tables together to accommodate everyone. Robert was in the middle of an enthusiastic story as they ate. "Did you hear the news? Station Delta 3 just announced they're starting their own relief initiative. They literally copied our model, used our procedures manual and everything. They're calling it the Delta Relief Network." "Epsilon 7 is doing the same thing," James added, excitement clear in his voice. "I heard there's a movement to make it standard policy across all Galactic Council stations. Every station required to have refugee support services." Helen raised her glass, her eyes twinkling. "To humans being stubborn enough to change the galaxy one meal at a time." They all raised their glasses and drank to that. Kireth looked around the table at the humans who'd saved her life and changed everything. Her markings pulsed with emotion as she spoke. "I've been thinking about something. The galaxy forgot. They got comfortable and powerful and wealthy, and they forgot what it means to need help. To be vulnerable. To be desperate." She paused. "But not humans. You remember." Marcus shrugged, uncomfortable with praise as always. "We haven't been successful long enough to forget, I guess. Give us a few centuries of comfort, we might end up the same way." "No," Kireth said firmly, shaking her head. "I don't think so. Because it's not just about remembering your own struggles. It's about seeing someone else's pain and recognizing it. Understanding it. Feeling it. That's empathy. That's what makes you different." The table fell quiet for a moment, each person considering her words. Thomas broke the silence. "Empathy. Yeah, I guess that is what makes us tick. Seeing someone hurt and feeling it yourself. Not being able to just walk past. It's not always easy," Helen added. "Empathy can be exhausting. It can hurt. Sometimes it costs you things you value. But it's worth it," Marcus said, looking at Kireth, at the others they'd helped, at the community they'd built. "It's always worth it." Later that night, after the dinner had ended and people had gone their separate ways, Marcus stood at one of the station's large viewing ports. He watched ships come and go, each one potentially carrying people who needed help, who were desperate, who were hoping for a chance. Kireth joined him, standing in comfortable silence for a while before speaking. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked quietly. "That first moment when you could have just walked past me?" When you could have ignored what you saw and kept your life simple? Marcus turned to look at her, her markings glowing brightly now, healthy and strong. Not for a single second, he said honestly. Best decision I ever made. You changed my life. You literally saved it. You would have done the same for someone else if positions were reversed. Maybe. But I don't know if I would have had the courage to do it first. To be the one who breaks the pattern. To be the one who stands up when everyone else is walking past. Marcus smiled. That's the thing about patterns though. Someone always has to break them. Someone has to be first. Might as well be us. Below them, in the comet's tail, Thomas was cleaning up from dinner. In apartments scattered across the station, refugees who'd arrived with nothing were sleeping safely, their bellies full. In other sectors, humans and aliens worked together on projects that would have seemed impossible months ago. Throughout it all, the echo of one simple act of kindness continued to ripple outward. The galaxy had forgotten what compassion looked like. It had forgotten that civilization meant more than technology and commerce. It had forgotten that power came with responsibility. It took humanity, a species barely noticed and barely respected, to remind them. And in remembering, perhaps the galaxy could finally become what it had always claimed to be. Not just advanced, not just organized, not just efficient, but kind. Retry.